All right, let's go ahead and get started. It's top of the hour. Welcome to the Transform Non-Emergency Services webinar, where we're going to talk about non-emergency services, 311 services, and the operations that go behind that. All right, so here's a cap of the agenda here. So we're going to talk about just kind of the landscape of the non-emergency service operations industry. And then talk about some of the pain points that are being encountered today. And then we're going to talk around some of the solutions. We're going to talk a little bit about AI, Gen AI, and how that's transforming the operations of non-emergency service centers. And then we'll take a look at a product that we just released at Intervision called Connective CX for Community Engagement. And then we'll do a recap after that. My name is Kirk Jubeck. I'm the product lead here at Intervision for our workforce modernization, which includes our contact center and unified communications offerings here at Intervision. And we're joined by Tammy Weinbrenner from Amazon, who brings a wealth of knowledge in the non-emergency industry. Tammy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Kirk. So Tammy Weinbrenner, I'm a customer engagement specialist at Amazon Web Services. So happy to join you, Kirk.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's just kind of dig into the industry, kind of where it is today and how it's evolved over the last number of years. So Tammy, do you want to share some of the insights that you've seen over the last few years in the non-emergency industry?
Yeah, definitely. I would say probably the top two problems that PSAPs and other kind of emergency and non-emergency call handling centers face in dealing with the non-emergency calls specifically are the call volume and staffing constraints. We know that PSAPs are often overwhelmed with this high volume of non-emergency calls, which really strains their limited resources. We know that most of them are understaffed, and that results in a delay in responding to emergency situations. So this overload really can lead to longer wait times, drop calls, certainly frustrated citizens, and even overworked call handlers. I think the second problem is the misuse of emergency lines. So many non-emergency calls are made for non-urgent matters, like finding general information or reporting minor issues that could be handled through other channels. And kind of the misuse of this really diverts resources away from true emergencies and undermines the effectiveness of the 911 system.
Okay. And the citizen expectations, have you seen the expectations change, over the last few years?
Oh, absolutely. And not just in this particular, not just particularly in non-emergency, but across the board in public sector. I think one of the outcomes of COVID especially is that citizens now are looking for the same experience that they have with those suppliers that they deal with on a regular basis, such as your bank, right? So they're looking for more personalization, access to different channels. So when I say that, something besides voice, and really looking to be able to handle any of their issues or questions on their schedule in the way that they want to communicate.
Okay. So on this next slide, we kind of list out some of the problems that you talked about here. One thing that I know in our past conversations we've talked about is training, right, and staffing, right. There's a high turnover rate within the industry, and so that requires a lot of investment in training, of new operators, call handlers. And if you hear me say agent, I mean call handlers, so I kind of use those terms interchangeably. So can you talk a little bit about that, about the needs that you've seen around just keeping the staffing that's required and the training involved?
Yeah, if you think about it, we hear reports really often from relative to PSAPs or even non-emergency other call handling centers that experience 30 to 50, sometimes even more attrition, right? And actually openings where they're actually understaffed continually. And 911 operators are highly trained resources. And so if you imagine the amount of time that you have to put into training them when they're not actually yet able to take calls, that just exacerbates the problem and also the cost. So the other piece of that, and you talk about it as staff retention, is just, and I kind of mentioned this, like being overworked and overwhelmed. And they want to help citizens. They want to really solve citizen problems, get emergencies, get help when it's needed, where it's needed. And the distraction of non-emergency calls, and especially those non-emergency calls that get diverted over to 911, really puts a lot of pressure on them and also leads to citizen, dissatisfaction. So the goal here is to find a way, if you think about automating non-emergency calls, right? There's an opportunity to, one, reduce the overall call volume, get calls, non-emergency calls answered faster, but also free up we've actually seen a customer do this, which I think is really fantastic. They've taken a new approach on how they answer these calls, and instead of routing them specifically to these higher trained 911 call handlers, they've actually created a separate group who are now handling non-emergency calls that can't be automated, and they become kind of the bench for future 911 call handlers. So a really unique way, an innovative way of approaching the problem.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so yeah, beyond that, what are you seeing other areas where they're trying to solve some of these pain points that we just discussed in that last slide?
Well, I think, the basics that we talked about here is implementing this call triage system, right? It helps you prioritize and redirect these non-emergency calls to the right resources. Well, also like collaborating with other agencies and service providers to really streamline that call delivery. Um, and really helping them to, right, I would say, uh, further automate, right? We've seen automation. I think we know we've seen that happening and this use of technology. But the other thing that we know is that often there's not data collected on these non-emergency calls. So by implementing this kind of call triage system and automation, you're able to actually gain data, which allows you to make really insightful decisions on how to further mature and innovate your offering.
Okay. And I know, another big issue that they're facing are budgets, right? Oftentimes, they're operating on limited budgets, so they're looking for ways that they can optimize their efficiency, reduce their costs. What have you seen customers doing to help, reduce their operating costs?
Well, these are the types of the solution that you're presenting are the types of things that are really actually showing in a return on investment. Um, where, right, if you're talking, and it can be somewhat of a interesting conversation because if you're solving for non-emergency, that doesn't always seem to have a direct relationship to 911 services and the budgets associated with them. But when you look at the return on investment and the ability to reduce the call volume, which ultimately reduces the cost per call, right? The dollars you're spending for each one of those calls, you're able to get more productivity out of your existing resources. And I know when we see customers that have implemented, they typically, we've seen as much as at the onset a 20% reduction in non-emergency call volumes. And you can imagine how that, if you look at the math around it, the amount of time that these highly paid, highly trained 911 call handlers now have that much more time to handle those true emergencies and are reducing the overall operating costs.
Okay, thank you. Um, okay, on the next slide, let's expand on that theme, of overcoming, those mentioned pain points. And I know, everybody's talking about Gen AI, generative AI. It's going to solve all the world's problems, right? I think that's a bit of hype. But there is, there are real world solutions today in the contact center that I think can make real impact that are, that can, provide uh, these options for reduced wait times, a lot of the pain points that we mentioned, quicker resolutions to issues, automated responses, and eventually, savings of costs through some of these solutions. And in generative AI, the solutions we're looking at are not necessarily to replace humans, but to augment human workflows, right? So like an assistant. Um, and looking in specific use cases, there's three that I want to talk about today. One is automated answering of calls. So the ability to have automated systems that are very intelligent to communicate and have that first response with the customer. Other solutions include agent assistants that can monitor conversations in real time and provide uh, feedback to the agents on how they should respond to particular issues. So talking about training, this really comes in to play here. And then conversational analytics, using Gen AI to summarize conversations to gain more insights into what's happening. So you talked about reporting analytics, trying to understand actually what's happening within the operations center to get better insights on how to improve and manage the operations.
Yeah, I think I would definitely just for clarity, double down on the keeping a human in the loop. We don't anticipate agents going anywhere anytime soon. And so I think this layered approach to resolving, some of the existing issues really is a powerful approach.
Okay, great. Um, so I'd like to introduce Connective CX for community engagement. It's the new solution that Intervision came out with here recently to help solve a number of these issues that we just mentioned within non-emergency and 301 operation centers. So this solution provides some of the Gen AI capabilities I just mentioned before that will help reduce those operating costs, provide better customer experience, and reduce that workload on the humans. So providing automation around answering those calls, or even using text-based interfaces like web chats or mobile applications, right, to communicate. So providing different communication channels, which improves accessibility, for those who might have disabilities. It really opens up the opportunity to engage those citizens. Using natural language interactions, I think people are familiar with Alexa and the kinds of conversations you can have with Alexa. So these same kinds of technologies are used within Connective CX to provide that more natural language conversational aspect versus, the old press one, press two, press three, or even the later generation AI where you had to say you could have more open conversations, but you still had to say things in a certain format. Gen AI has really upped the game in the terms of these self-service applications and the ability to respond, to citizens who call in or chat in. One of the big benefits of these automated solutions is they're available 24/7, right? No complaining, no breaks. It's always up and available to field those calls. One of the things that we pride ourselves on here at Intervision is the ability to stand up our solutions quickly. So we spend time to develop the modules and the building blocks where we can stand up customers very quickly, and also have configurability. So to work with the customer to understand what the issues are, so that we can narrow down on those particular pain points and provide the solution that's going to best meet their needs. And again, we talk about some of these issues and the outcomes, um, using the Connective CX solution in terms of creating that operational efficiency, cost effectiveness, and um, yeah, and the data-driven insights, right? You're collecting a lot of data out of these self-service applications, these automated bots. that you can use to further dig in to understand, what are callers or people who are using text interfaces are chatting about. So here's a high level, what I call a architecture slide that kind of shows the different building blocks of the solution. If we look over on the left-hand side of this diagram, we have our citizens that are contacting the operations center, the 311 or the non-emergency line. And again, this can happen through a voice conversation, or this can be through a web chat or through a mobile application if you want to enable those channels. And the first thing it'll hit is this pre-trained chatbot or automated application that can answer the call or respond to that text in real time, and um, and provide the ability to determine why is the caller calling, right? We call that intent within the contact center industry, or why are they calling? So we predefine 28 different intents that are very common types of services that are used within non-emergency, to determine what the caller is calling about. And where we really up the game on this solution over other solutions that you may have seen in the market is using Gen AI to really back up that conversation. Training that knowledge base on your city specific services and details around that, so that the chatbot can provide informative answers that are based on your particular service definition. So it really ups the game in terms of determining, what the caller is calling about, and also the ability to respond back to that caller in a much more natural language format than you would have seen in previous generations of automated applications. And then for each one of those intents, and these intents can be customized. So if there's intents that are predefined that you don't want to use, we can pull those out, add additional ones in there to suit the needs of your operations. And then for each one of those intents that you have configured within the system, you can configure the actions that you would like that to take. So one of them would be transferring to a call handler. So the typically way that anybody would answer if you didn't have an automated application up front. You can send that to an external phone number. So if you want a call to transfer to a different department that has a 10-digit phone number, you can configure that as an action. And again, these are on a per intent basis that you can do these configurations. Or you can invoke another self-service application. So if you want to allow a customer, say, for example, to enroll in a building inspection, right, to schedule an appointment for a building inspection, you could provide automated services to do those types of things also. Or if you want to do integrations to back-end systems. So imagine a use case where somebody's calling in to report a pothole. You might have a back-end system that's tracking those service requests. And so you can do integrations on the back end to automate that process, for tracking those service requests. And as you pointed out before, cost is always a big issue. And within a contact center, the agents themselves, or the call handlers, are typically the most expensive component of the contact center. So that's why you see a lot of solutions around saving time of those agents, because they are the most expensive resource. And so that brings me to the top right here, the other application of Gen AI that I talked about, which is agent assistance. And this is where the call will, if it makes it to the agent, if the caller needs to talk to an agent, which they can say, hey, I want to talk to a human, I want to talk to a person, and it'll transfer them there. And then you can have, the individual intents also configured to go to an agent. So once that has been transferred, the agent assistant is listening in real time, transcribing that conversation, and providing feedback to that agent in real time based on the specific training data that was used to train this knowledge bases on your specific services and details around those services. So I'll show you some numbers here in a little bit, but there's some really great return on investment stories around these Gen AI solutions. And so you might think, oh, Gen AI, that's really expensive, too complicated. But you'll see that it really has a compelling return on investment story. All right, then we talked about conversational analytics and just digging in to understand what types of conversations are customers having with the automated bot and also with the call handlers themselves. So we have a conversational analytics tool built into the Connective CX solution. Connective CX is actually powered by Amazon Connect, so it's built on a very scalable, flexible platform. It's a pay-as-you-go cost model. And the conversational analytics really helps you dig into those conversations and see from a higher level. You can see what the summary of conversations across the contact center, and then you can drill into specific conversations to understand, if there's issues happening on the individual conversations. Um, and one of the nice features of this conversational analytics tool is the ability to detect themes. So you can categorize conversations into different areas that can be used to report on them. You can determine sentiment. So it's automatically kind of listening to the words and the tone of voice and determining the sentiment of that citizen as they're engaging with the system. So these are all things that are very helpful for supervisors and managers to help optimize and tune their operations to get the best bang for their buck out of the solution. So I just kind of want to share some numbers here. So I have a couple of use cases that I wanted to show where you can see this cost optimization, cost savings, and have a good return on investment story. So when you're going back looking for budgets to improve your contact center through these innovations, it provides a much easier path to be able to explain and justify that expense. So in this particular use case, I looked at 1 million calls per year. So we'll say it's a year, 1 million calls, and assume that 20% of those calls are going to be handled fully by the self-service application, this pre-trained AI bot up front. So 20% of those will be handled exclusively by there. So that's 200,000 calls, which means 800,000 calls reach the agents. And if we assume an average handle time of 5 minutes, we're looking at a savings of about $737,000, or which is significant, right? And this is 1 million calls, which really is 10 to 20 agents, I think, max, to handle that type of traffic. And you can see down here at the bottom, the cost for an automated solution at 10 cents a minute is significantly lower than 83 cents a minute. And this is assuming a $50 per hour fully loaded cost for a call handler or an agent. So you can see, just on the per minute basis, there's significant cost savings there.
Yeah, and to your point, Kirk, this doesn't even consider the things like reduced training, right? So, we've seen customers who have cut their onboarding training in half by 50%. So as you're going to talk about, I guess,
Yeah,
this really
yeah,
actually drives additional costs besides these hard costs,
yeah.
cost savings.
No, that's a great segue into this next one, where we talk about the agent assistant, right? And reducing that average handle time, because we talked about reducing the workload on the agents, and if you can reduce the handle time for those calls, you're looking at very significant savings here. So in this particular example, again, we use a $50 per hour loaded cost, and assuming that the agents are utilized at 80% of their time. So if and we're going to assume a contact center of 100 agents that's operating 24/7. If you can reduce the average handle time by 20%, which we've seen use cases where this is averaging 10 to 20% savings on average handle time. So if you crush these numbers here, you're looking at a savings of $19,000 per day, which that's real money, right? And $7 million a year for 100 agent contact center. So this is significant money that you can use when you're looking at budgets, when you're looking at that justification for that return on investment. These are real numbers that can be used to justify that expense. And I'll just wrap this up by plugging Intervision here. We start out by listening to our customers and really understanding the challenges they're facing and the goals that they're trying to achieve, how they'd like to turn the dial on the metrics that they might be using to track, the operations within the contact center. So we get in there, and then we can bring our expertise in to find the right solution. Obviously, we have Connective CX for community engagement, predefined out of the box. We can, get up and running in a matter of weeks instead of months. And then we can provide that customization to meet the needs of your particular operations. And then we continue that with ongoing optimization and continue looking at the metrics and providing expertise on where the next steps of innovation might be, or how you might be able to optimize that performance to, again, turn the dial on those metrics that are important to your operations. So I think that's the last slide there. So we have only about 4 minutes here. I want to open this up for any questions we have in the panel here. And let me see if I can get those up. All right. Thought I saw some chats coming in. Here we go. Q&A. So question comes up, what changes have you seen in the staff composition as a result of this implementation? Potential reduction in the call handling staff, the onset by additions of business analysts or other positions. I don't know, Tammy, you want to talk about that a little bit, about how you've seen kind of the staffing makeup change and the back end management to understand kind of what's happening within their contact centers?
Yeah, I think I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, but a couple things we've seen. Again, certainly this reliance more on the engagement of like a business analyst, right? So someone who actually can use this great data to help mine it for insights and further innovate and mature, how they handle calls. I think from a call handler perspective, one of the things we're seeing is the ability to start tiering agents or engaging kind of tiered agents, right? So if you have someone who is called a non-emergency line or has a non-emergent issue and is unable to serve, self-serve, they don't need to be transferred to a 911 call handler. So customers have brought in more tier one type agents, right, who are perhaps lower skilled and not fully trained on handling 911 services to handle these calls, right? So just in that approach, one, you're handling more contacts, you're giving a better customer satisfaction, but also obviously you have a lower labor rate. And you mentioned it, labor is 50 to 80% of operating costs. And so just by the ability to bring on agents at a lower cost, really helps drive that cost savings. And then they also become the bench, right? These are agents who now have experience on the phone, understanding what particular, questions and dealing with citizens. And they become a great opportunity for you to train them as 911 call handlers as they grow in their career.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we only have the one question here. If anybody else has another question, go ahead and
I
type it
think
in
there's
here.
one in there about, so what safeguards are in place to keep the AI from providing bad answers like hallucinations to citizens?
Yeah. So, within, the Amazon ecosystem and the Gen AI capabilities built into there, they do provide mechanisms where you can provide guardrails around. So obviously you're training your knowledge bases on your specific contact center operations, which will narrow down the focus of the responses. And then additionally, you can add guardrails on top of that to provide additional protection in case, a bot might go hallucinate on you, which, is a problem that happens sometimes. And so we want to limit that in the customer facing interfaces that are provided. So there are solutions available today to help alleviate those issues.
And I know we'd also call out that from a Gen AI perspective, one of the best practices is always also to keep a human in the loop. right? And that
Yes.
is another layer of the safeguards.
Yeah. I mean, I like to think of these automated bots as is another staff member who needs the same kind of care and feeding that, a human would. So, continually do performance reviews and understanding, how they're performing. So I think that's an important
I like
part.
that. Yeah.
So we're at the bottom of the hour. I want to thank everybody who joined for attending. Hope you learned something out of this, and definitely reach out to us if you want to learn more about the solution or how we can help your contact center reduce cost and improve its operations. All right, thank you.
Thanks.